Hello everyone! I've been reading some Romans. If you watched my last video, you know I just read John Milton's Paradise Lost, and Milton was very indebted to Latin literature. So much so that some of his detractors say that he was trying to write Latin literature in English and thereby mangled his English. I definitely wouldn't go that far, but there's definitely something odd in Milton's poetry, especially Paradise Lost. It does feel anachronistic, more anachronistic than some figures before him. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. There's some really wonderful writing in English that is wonderful because of its anachronisms, because of its strangeness. A lot of good translated work can be like that. The other language introduces rhythms that break up what you expect from English. It makes something really beautiful. That said, I really don't have a right to speak on this because I don't know very much about Latin literature. I'm not well read in it. I've read some Greeks, some Homer, some Sophocles, some other stuff, but I haven't read almost any Latin literature. So it's time to change that. Coming in from Milton, I would start with Virgil, by all rights, but the fates of the local bookstores have led me a different way. I got this set of 6 volumes from a library bookstore near me. They're from a series published by Cooper Square called Our Debt to Greece and Rome. I think they started in the 1920s or 30s and continued publishing up through the 1950s, reaching 52 volumes in total. Each one focuses on a different author or topic in Greek or Roman literature, and a different scholar writes about that. Kind of a brief, pleasant little introduction to their life, their work, and their influence afterwards. I've read 3 so far. I've read Ovid, Plautus and Terence, and Cicero. And having a different author for each book, you can get a lot of variation. They take different approaches to how to introduce you to the author, whether or not the excerpts they use are translated. But then the biggest one that's felt is in how personal and opinionated their writing is. Some of them are writing as critics, some of them are writing as historians, and you can feel that difference. In particular, the author of this volume on Plautus and Terence very much has his opinion. He leans towards one of the 2 playwrights, and he is not afraid to tell you. Plautus and Terence are kind of the 2 first major Roman literary figures that we have. They were both writers of comedies. Plautus is a little bit earlier than Terence. Both of them were borrowing from Greek comedy, particularly Menander. And the author of this volume would have you think that everything good that Plautus did was taken from Menander. He was basically a good translator and nothing else. All of his personal additions were negative additions. Whereas he holds up Terence as the better dramatist and kind of bemoans the fact that Plautus gets a little more attention because he was first. A couple things saved me from that viewpoint entirely directing my view of Plautus. One was that I read that book in conjunction with this book, The Roman Way by Edith Hamilton. It's very good to read different opinions about a figure together. If you're not familiar with Edith Hamilton, she was a classical scholar who wrote these really wonderful, accessible, popular books, The Roman Way and The Greek Way, that are great introductions to the most important literary figures of those 2 groups. I see her works pretty often in bookstores because they were very popular. They were super accessible. She has a wonderful way of taking a very short, brief chapter that doesn't dive into the complexities of the figure, but she still makes you feel the weight of their literary importance. In a single paragraph in this book on the Romans, in a chapter on Plautus, she tripled my drive to go and read Aristophanes because a couple of offhanded sentences on his importance contrasted to that of Plautus made me feel so much more interested in both of them. But honestly, the best way to understand Plautus is to read him. And I think to read him in a modern translation that feels fresh and funny. I read these 4 comedies by Eric Segal. And let me just say first, I'm a big fan of old translations. I like it when you can feel the age of the text, a little bit of strangeness that comes through, a little bit of foreignness to our contemporary spoken English. But maybe you don't want that with comedies. These are funny. I laughed a couple times, out loud, reading them in public. Not every play hits the same. Sometimes there's just a moment or a line that will make you chuckle a little bit. But what's super important is just that these don't feel stiff. The plays feel alive here. They feel like they have the potential to be humorous and amusing and very enjoyable to watch. It is true that Plautus isn't as highbrow, he isn't as elegant or polished as Terence, but that's because his plays served a different purpose. They were performed in front of crowds of people, many less literate than others, to make people laugh and to entertain people. So it makes sense that the greatest figure who has pulled from Plautus often had to do the same thing, and that would be William Shakespeare. Shakespeare's A Comedy of Errors is a Plautus play with a couple extra steps. The basic plot, the heart of that play, is Plautus's The Brothers Menachmus. Shakespeare just adds a second set of twins. But it's not just a play. Reading Plautus helped me understand some of Shakespeare's comedy better. His pairings of these master and slave dynamics in a lot of his early comedies comes right from Plautus. Although where in Shakespeare the slaves are often a comic relief, in Plautus they're often driving the plot forward, and sometimes the master is the comic relief. Some of the other figures are familiar. The really goofy knight in Love's Labour's Lost is right here in The Braggart Soldier. And none of this, of course, is a dig on Shakespeare. It is praise for Plautus. I did also read Plautus in an older translation. In this volume, Chief European Dramatists, this is from 1916, so most of the translations are from the 19th century. And it has a play of Plautus and a play of Terence. And Plautus does not look as good in this translation. It's not nearly as funny. In fact, I barely remember it. Terence does come through elegant and enjoyable in here, which makes perfect sense for him and what he was trying to do with his plays. But I really couldn't say more about Terence because I've only read the one play in here, and I don't have anything else from him. Now, you might think because we started with Plautus and Terence that we're going in order, but no. Next is Ovid. I read Ovid's Metamorphoses. I read some of the love poetry. I've been itching to read Ovid forever. Every time I pick up a book on mythology, the question that comes into my mind instantly is, why are you not just reading the Metamorphoses? For so long, the Metamorphoses has been the source book of Greek and Roman mythology. Our painters, our poets, our playwrights have pulled on Ovid and his stories for material for so long. We've been cutting this work up into little pieces, which is funny because the defining feature of it is how he knits things together. He tells all the stories in this continuous narrative, his goal being to tell the history of the world through stories of transformation, beginning with the creation of the universe, the transformation of disordered substance into the ordered world, and continuing through stories about gods and other mythology, to the myths surrounding the origins of Rome, to his present day, where he talks about Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar, Julius Caesar being transformed into a god, so that Augustus Caesar can be born one. But you get the sense through all of it that he's maybe not taking it so seriously. There are so many stories that have a humorous undertone or a mock seriousness that prevents it from having any kind of religious reverence. You get the sense that Ovid is using the stories as an excuse to write poetry. And I want to say that's why we've pulled from him for so long, because we do the same thing. We're using his stories as an excuse to write poetry. His myths that are not our myths. His histories that are not our history. At the end of the work, he praises Caesar. He praises Rome. He talks about Caesar's immortality and how he will ascend to godhood. And I don't think we really buy any of it, especially at the end of a poem that is about transformation. He knows Rome will fall. I think he knows Caesar won't become a god. But then he talks about the poet. He talks about his own poetry and its immortality. He steps outside the theme of his poem to talk about literature and art and its enduring power. Through his stories of changes, he has made something that will not change. and we have gone on to reinvent and reinterpret, to cut up and piece together this book, but the text is still with us, so to some degree Ovid has gotten his wish. Next is Cicero. Cicero's definitely outside of what I usually read. We're now reaching more into history, and oratory is definitely a bit of a different literary form than I'm used to. What's interesting reading Cicero's speeches is I kind of get the feeling that I get reading poetry, which is that it'd be better in the original language. Because the art of oratory is so precise, so specific. It's down to the rhythm of words and the rhythm of speech, and the way that those rhythms can be used to evoke emotion. I don't think it's that crazy of a comparison. I've definitely read texts that theorize the origin of poetry as impassioned speech. But that said, I didn't enjoy reading Cicero as much as I would enjoy reading a translated poem. The goals of these texts were different, right? They were to convince someone in Cicero's immediate context. They're not self-contained units. To get at them, you kind of need some historical backing. Of course, we can read Cicero, and we can appreciate a lot of the things about him that feel familiar. A lot of the things that Cicero is arguing about in these volumes are things that we deal with to this day. It's also interesting how familiar his rhetoric feels, the way that he argues. I don't know what I expected when I started reading him. I kind of thought you would find mind-blowing insights, incredibly persuasive arguments, but what he's doing feels really standard. And that makes sense now that I think about it. He's been used for so long as an educational tool to teach rhetoric, to teach Latin, that he's kind of become ingrained. The way he argues is very similar to the way we argue, even in that it's not always cold, impassionate reason, but it's often emotional appeals and stirring up feelings of patriotism, feelings of compassion for the figures he's defending, and sometimes saving face. Sometimes you can tell that he is trying to puff himself up a little bit and puff up his past achievements as a defense mechanism. And it's fun to see that personal touch in the speeches of a figure so old. After reading Cicero, I got something of a push to do more history, to better understand the context to the figures I'm reading. I read Caesar's account of the Civil War, his war with Pompey. It was enjoyable. I don't have as much to say about it. Even more than the Cicero speeches, I think I would have to know more of the history to get more out of it. Not only is this historical, but it's a chronicle of military battles, so it's so far out of my typical reading that I just don't know. I just don't know what I have to say about it. And that's the most recent book I've finished. I'm still trying to get a better handle of history, so I picked up this, The Life and Times of Marc Antony by Arthur Weigel from 1931. I haven't got very far in yet. I just got this actually at my local Goodwill a couple days ago because I'm reading about the time period and the volume is really pretty, so I couldn't resist. I also started Lucretius, translated by Rolf Humphreys. Lucretius is maybe the one figure who I wish I had some kind of biographical information on, but I don't think I have any anywhere, so I'm just reading the poem. I also haven't gone very far in yet, but it's been enjoyable so far. I almost didn't read this one because it's so unique. It almost feels like it doesn't belong. But having started it, I am glad I did, because there are a lot of ways that Ovid is in dialogue with this. Having not studied the connection, I do wonder how much you could say Ovid was responding to him. Lucretius writes this naturalist, materialist account of the whole world, and then Ovid goes and writes this poetic account of the world through unnatural, mythical transformations. And of course, Ovid at the end of his book has Pythagoras speak about the universe as a single, ongoing, changing substance, which in a lot of ways is like what Lucretius is writing about, and in a lot of ways it's very different. Kind of the main point of difference being whether souls are eternal. Okay, my phone's about to die. This is just an anthology. I've been supplementing with the Norton classical literature. Next video will probably be a book haul, because I have a lot of books that I haven't shown yet. See you all next time.